Good morning. We'll wait here for people to roll in and join us this morning. Welcome. People are coming in faster now. Glad to see the names popping up on the screen. Appreciate you guys joining us this morning. Good morning. Hello, good morning. Well, I'll get started. My name is 𝘾𝙤𝙢𝙢𝙦, and I lead Minnesota Crossroads Career Network locally here in the Minneapolis area. I know some of you are joining us from other parts of the country as well, and so I'm certainly welcome you here and glad that you can join us this morning. We've got quite a bit of good content for you this morning, and I want to make sure that we get to everything. I'm glad that you can take advantage of this. You were probably on our website to register for this initially, and at the end of our session, after Dave Sparkman's presentation this morning, I'll run through everything that's available through Crossroads so that you can take advantage of other help and resources as well. We have a lot of things all free to you that can help you through your to land your job successfully, and that's obviously the goal here for everyone, right? Was going to mention one other thing real quick, and I can't. It's too early. I hope you all have your cups of coffee and get some caffeine. I probably need more of it myself. But in any case, I'm glad you're here, and we have video for you this morning, and then we have Dave Sparkman, which you came to hear, to talk about compensation strategies. And I'm guessing one or two of you are probably interested in how can I get the best offer as possible in my next job. And so Dave's going to address that thoroughly for you. But, our hope with Crossroads is, certainly to provide the best help and resources for your job search as we can. But while we're also pointing to the encouragement and hope in Jesus Christ, there's a perspective in the Bible I think is important to rely on when we're going through challenging times in life, like a job search. It's, the idea of always having an attitude of gratitude, no matter what circumstances we may be going through. In Scripture, it says, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. It doesn't say give thanks for all circumstances. You don't have to be thankful for tough things that happen. But the idea is that no matter what circumstances you find yourselves in, be deliberate in maintaining a thankful heart and a grateful attitude. It's easy to focus on the things that aren't going the way we want in our lives, and then take for granted or forget about all the things that are good. If we have a roof over our heads, food in the refrigerator, a healthy body, friends, family, resources, a community we can turn to for support, like Crossroads, we have more than a large percentage of people in the world out there. And having an attitude of gratitude makes us less stressed, happier, more willing to help others, more likable, and more attractive to potential employers, which is the goal, right? I encourage you to take the time to sit down and literally list out all the good things in your life. Then acknowledge that all good things come from God and thank Him for it. It makes a big difference when you put things in proper perspective. We can be thankful that the God that created the universe came in the human form of Jesus to give us a means to be in a relationship with Him like never before. That's the first thing to be thankful for, and that's the only thing that'll bring eternal joy into your life. Let me open us in a word of prayer, and then we'll move on with our presentations this morning. Lord, I'm grateful that we can join together in meeting this morning, even if it's just virtually and we're just watching on a screen. But Father, we pray that you use this time for your purposes, that you give us each a heart of gratitude, that we fully understand that there are so many good things in our lives that sometimes we just take for granted. Help us to see the things that matter most, and to get some things today that are going to be helpful in our process. And we pray that, Lord, that you draw us to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And so with that, I've got a video, a short 8-minute video by Charlotte Smith, who was a star player in college basketball, won the national championship. She made it into professional sports and ultimately the WNBA, but found that she kind of lost balance in her life, and her identity wasn't where it needed to be. And so let me share my screen here and share the video. Why is that not come up? Here we go.
We found ourselves at the Final Four facing Louisiana Tech. That was one of those games where it went neck to neck. We threw up a shot, and Marion Jones and myself were rolling on the floor. The whistle went off, there was jump ball, and I vividly remember looking up at the clock, and there was 0.7 seconds left on the clock. We go to the huddle. Coach Hatcher says we're going for the win and not the tie. And she said, "Charlotte, you're gonna take the shot." It feels like an eternity, and I'm backpedaling behind the three-point line. I'm just thinking, oh my God, please let this shot go in.
Beats inside, outside, 𝘿𝙖𝙫𝙀, three-pointer on the way.
And we win a national championship. Game winner, buzzer beater. The shot that I practiced hundreds of times in my backyard as a little girl has manifested in this moment. And it changed the whole trajectory of my life. Well, I was born and raised in Shelby, North Carolina. I grew up a PK, a pastor's kid. You know, I grew up on a dead-end street, but we were shielded by our family, shielded by our faith. And I grew up watching my mom and my dad, the love that they had for the community. They didn't judge the people in our community. They just showed them love, and they pointed them to Christ. And so we spent a lot of time with our mom and dad in the community, trying to instill hope in the people that we came in contact with. Sports was in our bloodline. I grew up watching my legendary uncle, David Thompson, who played at NC State, and he went on to play in the NBA. I saw his lifestyle. I thought sports was my way out. And so sports, at that point in my life, took priority over everything. You know, I always had confidence as a little girl. I always thought that I could be great. I had this mindset of, I'm gonna be a pro one day. I idolized Michael Jordan. I wanted to be like Mike. I wore the number 23. I wore shoes that were too small, simply because I wanted to wear Jordans, Air Jordans. And when I found out that Michael Jordan went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I knew that's where I wanted to be. One of the things that drew me to the University of North Carolina was Coach Sylvia Hatchell. She was a woman of great faith, and I knew that I wanted to surround myself with people with like mindsets, and like mindsets in terms of faith. She believed that we could become national champions.
Beats inside, outside, 𝘿𝙬𝙀, three-pointer on the way, it is good!
We spoke it every single day in the huddle, national champs. We believed in the power of words. We believed in the power of our works, and so we wanted to put the work in, and we did that in a matter of 3 years.
Are the national champions.
And it's like when you experience those euphoric highs, you want to try to recreate those things. During that time frame, I didn't really think a whole lot about my spiritual life. Yes, I was saved. I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal savior, but I never thought about meshing and mixing the two, sports and ministry. So it was kind of like Jesus was in my back pocket at that point in time. There's a lot of temptations, a lot of distractions. Unfortunately, because at that point in time, I wasn't strong enough in my identity. I fell into a lot of sexual temptation. I failed to live up to the standards of what it meant to be a Christian. Yeah, I professed to be a Christian, But behind the scenes, I was doing a lot of things that I knew that my parents wouldn't approve of, and I knew that wouldn't make God proud. I felt lost. I felt lonely at times. I amassed all of this worldly success in terms of being the Rookie of the Year, All Conference, Player of the Year, winning a national championship, hitting a game-winning shot. I went on those euphoric highs through worldly success, but still there was something missing inside, a void. My career as we know it is over, and I'm thinking about what am I gonna do? There were no professional leagues here in the States. And so I took my talents to Italy, where I played professionally for the first time in a foreign country. And it was the first time that I was away from my family where they couldn't get to me. It was a very valuable time in my life because I really took time to dig into the Word of God. I transitioned to the ABL, the American Basketball League, and played professionally there, and then on to the WNBA. And I remember trying to recreate those euphoric highs. I wanted to be a WNBA All-Star. I wanted to be MVP. I wanted all of those accolades because those accolades led to the applause. Those accolades led to acceptance. And year after year in the WNBA, I would fall short of my WNBA wish list. Finally, you hit that brick wall where you surrender to God. And you realize that, like, He is my hope, He is my joy, He's my peace, and He is the love of my life. And I just remember feeling like Holy Spirit was speaking in that moment and saying, what have you done for me lately? There comes a point in time where you have to make a decision. Are you gonna give God your whole heart and fully surrender? And it was after like a lot of heartbreak, I decided to redirect my focus. And so I would sit down and study my Bible. I would write devotionals. I would put those devotionals in the lockers of my teammates. I had some really challenging times in the WNBA. I wanted to give up, but I knew that I had a greater purpose, and that was to serve God. I grew closer to the end of my professional career. I still didn't know if I wanted to coach at that point, but I said the only way that I'm gonna know is to give myself to it. When I became the head coach of Elon University, my goal was to put Elon on the map. The first year we won regular season championship, conference championship. I was coach of the year. Euphoric high, once again. And I'm thinking to myself, how is it that I can feel like I'm in a dark place? I remember waking up the very next day, and I just felt like Holy Spirit was whispering to me, I want to be the one that fills you, that completes you. All of these things that you're accomplishing, these things fade, but I want to be your eternal hope and your eternal joy. We live in a generation where it is all about ourselves and doing what makes us happy and what pleases us and what brings our flesh joy. But it's all about living for God. It's all about being a light for His glory. You know, I tell my players all the time, sports is not life. It's a part of life. And the sooner that you can understand that, the easier it is to take hold of your true identity. And there is this merger of sports and ministry. There is no separation. It's my faith, sports, always.
We go. Appreciate that, because her perspective, because it's easy for most of us to get wrapped up in what we do for a living versus who we are, and wrap up our identity in what we do versus as a child of God. And when we get the priorities right, life changes. And you know, the job is important. We all have to get a paycheck. We all need to pay bills, and we want to succeed and make a difference in a company and in the world. And those are good things, but getting the priorities right is critical. Next, I'm really glad Dave joined us on screen here. Dave Sparkman is our speaker for today, talking about compensation strategies. If you're not familiar with Dave, I consider him a friend, but he's the one that started Crossroads at Grace Church in Eden Prairie. Currently, he's executive director for the National Crossroads organization, but he also professionally was originally with Arthur Anderson as a partner, went through losing his position and had to go through a job search and landed ultimately at United Health Group here in the Twin Cities, and ultimately became the chief culture officer for the organization. And so in his work in HR and in culture, he knows a little bit about how offers are made and how they're negotiated and what the priorities are in those situations. And so I know you'll get a lot of great context for your own situation out of this, but really glad to have Dave here, and you've got the next hour. Thanks, Dave.
Great. Thank you, Harry. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. Let's get the logistics figured out here, and then we will jump in. Let's see. Hopefully everybody can see my screen with compensation strategies. And to get us started, if you've arrived on the call thinking, okay, I'm going to receive an answer as to why I wasn't paid what I think I should have been paid, or I'm going to get the silver bullet answer on what the right amount is that I should be paid going forward, then I will unfortunately disappoint you. I don't have a silver bullet, but I think through experience and talking to many other people, including Harry, recruiters who are in the market all the time, there are some fundamental things about compensation that I believe are very, very important to help you land the very best possible outcome that you can get with regard to your compensation. And as Harry mentioned earlier, who of course isn't interested in saying, wow, I'd like to be paid, what I'm worth? How do I even know what I'm worth? How do I figure that out in this world with job descriptions all over the place? And the good news is we have our friend Google that can lead us into a lot of places. The bad news is our friend Google can lead us into a lot of places that don't give us good information. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But to get us started, we're going to have a little exercise. And this is one of my favorite exercises to go through because it helps us get a perspective on how we look at things. And so what I'm going to do is in the next slide, and given that we're all on Zoom, I'm going to ask you to share your response in the chat room, if you would be so kind. And I'm simply I'm asking you, what do you see? What do you observe in the slide? Now, the slide is only going to be on the screen a couple seconds if Zoom works effectively for us. So you're going to have to just absorb a lot very quickly, but then we're going to come back and ask you what you saw. All right, so let's see how that works. All right, that was exciting. You absorbed quite a bit. So in the chat, if you could share, what did you see? All right, we got one answer. A married couple, Gina, thank you. And of course, I can't see the hands, but normally we would say, how many of you saw the married couple? A rubber duck, Rochelle, thank you so much. A clock, flowers, monkey. Oh man, Becky, you saw 4 things. Okay, Bill, oh, terrific. All right, thank you. So a lot was seen. And you may ask yourself psychologically, why did you see the thing you saw? That could be interesting to play around with today. Or you could perhaps see what's in the chat and say, well, wait a second, Becky saw this, but I didn't see that. How do I know Becky's telling the truth? I mean, it was only on there for a few, people can make up all sorts of stuff. I assure you, Becky did not do that. But we all see different things for different reasons. And I'm not going to get into why all that is. I'm not a psychologist, but there are reasons we see different things. Now, I'm going to show you the exact same collage of objects. And this, I'm instead of just asking you to observe and tell me what you see, I'm going to ask you to look for something red. All right. Now what did you see? If you could be so kind in chat to tell me what you saw. A rose. Gina saw a rose. Very good. There was a rose there. Bill, a rose. Okay, girl with red hair. Ooh, that with Rochelle, that's a hard one because it was hidden behind my face. That's very good. A red bell. Okay, strawberry, rose, a lighthouse. All of you, great answers. Now the question is, why did you see what you saw? And if you're like most people that do this exercise, you'd say, well, because you asked us to look for something red. And those were red objects. So I gave you a filter or a lens to look through. And if you're like most people that I do this exercise with, and if we were all together and could see a show of hands, I asked how many of you saw at least one thing that you did not see before, literally almost every hand would go up. Because we sharpened the focus. We got the filter there. I simply asked you to look for something different and you saw it. Well, that's what compensation is all about, because many people have a filter going through. Oh, and I know some of you are like, okay, I want to see the collage again. All right, here's the collage. There's the guy with the guitar. Where's the girl with the red hair? I think the girl with the red hair was, yep, there she is right behind my face. Thank you very much. Anyway, a lot of people, when they're going through their job transition, compensation is in their mind, but it's not at the forefront in their mind. They don't have a sharp focus or a filter to be alert for things that they could find out about compensation. And so what I will implore you today, and hopefully stimulate you with enough information to trigger, is for you to have a filter that starts to look for compensation opportunities no matter where you are in the job search. A lot of people will think, well, we're only going to talk about compensation at the end. And that, of course, is true. But if you're not doing your homework, if you're not gathering information, you won't be as effective as you could be in arriving at what that answer should be for you and your compensation. All right, so thank you for going through that exercise. So another little quiz to hopefully reinforce my point. How much do you know, or should you know? If, and I don't need you to answer this in the chat, but if we were to go through and answer every one of these questions, could you do it? Just scan there. Are wages rising or falling? What professions are in demand? The last one is a zinger. I know exactly what I want to make and that my market value corresponds to that number. If you're like most people, you probably couldn't answer all of those questions accurately. And yet all of those questions have a direct influence on the supply and demand in the marketplace for jobs. Well, supply and demand, of course, leads to pricing. And if you're not aware of these things, that pricing and your expectations or your filters could be skewed. So first thing to be aware of is, of course, your environment and what type of place are you hunting in. Just a quick reference, many of you, all of you, will recall COVID. And when it started in March of 2020, thereabouts, what happened to unemployment? Boo, it skyrocketed. It went up to a 50-year high. I think it was like 11.5%. Well, what happens to supply and demand, and what happens to compensation if unemployment just skyrockets? Well, employers don't necessarily have to pay as much to get the people. In a few short months later, something I thought was going to take years, unemployment dropped once again to a 50-year low of 3.5%. Well, guess what happens to compensation? And all of a sudden, we started seeing some crazy things happen with what companies were willing to pay for certain skill sets. So my point through our little exercise and this quiz is, the more you know up front and the more that these filters are in place about compensation, the better your odds and your chances are to arrive at a conclusion that's going to be satisfactory to you. So, in summary, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're sure to find it You know, I can't begin to tell you the number of people I've talked to that come to the end of a job search. They have an offer in hand, but now they have to decide whether to accept it or not. They have to decide, well, do I negotiate or not? Is this offer fair with what I'm worth? And they don't know the answers to that because they haven't been gleaning information along the way. So I would just encourage you, if nothing else comes out of this conversation or my presentation this morning, it's to have a very high filter, a radar that's out there looking for, how can I gather more information about my specific opportunity, the skills that I have, the abilities I have, and what I might be paid for something. So to do that, we're going to go through these 8 things. Timing targets, pesky questions, who goes first. A lot of things that I have found over the years are normal questions that I receive about compensation. And then we will have some time for questions at the end. So if I don't hit something that that you would like to know, or if I've touched on something but you want to go further, or I wasn't clear, we're going to have a chance to do that. So please have your pen or pencils out, jot some notes, and if you have questions, then we can certainly come back to those. So first of all, let's look at timing. This is a slide that I think is very effective once you figure out what it exactly means on managing your expectations. When I was unemployed after the implosion of Arthur Andersen following Enron, I thought I would be unemployed for maybe a month, maybe 2. I ended up being unemployed for 7 months. And not only unemployed for 7 months, but I ended up moving from Los Angeles, California to the Twin Cities, which at the time I thought was like being sent to the Congo. I mean, when you have I spent 10 years in LA, and to go to Minnesota was just, whoa, that's like another planet. But as Harry had mentioned earlier, the Lord has it all in mind. I was giving thanks in the moment, not for the circumstances, but in the moment, seeking what would happen. But I had in my mind a certain amount of time that I thought it, air quotes, should take. And that turned out to be very different. One of the gentlemen I was coaching as he was going through actually put together this concept. And as he was thinking about what to go after, he said, well, if I really focus on my top priorities, that's the center of the target. You know, United Health Group was there, USAA Insurance was there. I'm not sure about the other 2, but this in Houston, and on prior, if I may start to do consulting or adjunct teaching. If I'm farther off, I may have to go to contract work, or then I may even go to gigs and nonprofits. So that's how the target works. Those time frames, then you see on the box where my cursor is, this is the milestone that he had set. And he did this early on in the search. So he was trying to be as objective as he possibly could before the emotions set in on what he would be looking for, so he could try to manage his finances. And so these are what your milestones may be different. You see that he has 2-month increments. You may have a week in. The most important things of compensation is, of course, knowing where you are now with your finances and knowing just what is the time expected, because guess what? If you need a job or you then you're going to accept a lower pay. It's like anything else. Those that can afford to wait and have opportunities pass them by, well, maybe they'll end up at a higher comp level. But if I need to go to an hourly wage, if I'm going to go work at McDonald's because I need to put food on my table, guess what? I'm not going to make what I was making at Arthur Andersen at the time when I was when the job imploded. So what these words mean next to it is, if he landed in his target, then he would look at that as a stay opportunity. The target outside the center would be a stepping stone to get to the center. The third is a stopgap measure. And the fourth was when he would come home, he'd say, "So, honey, we've got to talk about a few things," because it wasn't working the way he had thought. But what I appreciated in this was that he did this up front, and he tried to get a good level of manageable expectations and realistic expectations in his time frame for compensation. So, number two, you may say, well, boy, I keep getting asked what my compensation is, and when do we cover that? We're going to hit that with the next answer, but the first thing is to develop an actual expectation. And what is the range that you're looking for? Because those questions are going to come up, and you must answer the question. I remember when I was at United Health Group, before I got involved with culture, I was the chief administrative officer for one of our segments, specialized care services, which became what is now known as Optum Health. And a recruiter came through with a candidate at the executive level. And of course, being the HR guy, my responsibility was to be on this candidate's schedule and ask the question, well, all right, where is the compensation range that this person is looking for? And the recruiter did not have the information. That was not a good day. All right. The last thing that we want to do when you're in an organization is spend time talking to someone that you may actually love, but you can't afford. Or maybe that compensation is way below what the market is, and you're going, well, what's going on there? How come this range is not what should be there? So you have to have an answer. Recruiters are paid to find out. It's a standard part of the screening process. And if you don't, you just won't pass go. So that said, you really never want to discuss salary until the end of the interview process. But the problem is they need to know a range. And we'll get to that in the next slide about you're not passing go, but you don't want to discuss it. So someone may say, well, what are you looking for in compensation? And you generally want to have a range of 15 to 20%. So you may say, well, I'm looking for a job between 80 and 100,000. That usually does the trick. I would say 98% of the time does the trick. Now, you may have all sorts of questions about compensation, like, well, 80 to 100 is that total compensation or base salary? Usually the what is being looked for is the range of the base salary. And then there's inevitably bonus. There might be stock or equity involved. There may be long-term incentives, but fundamentally, you need to know what your base salary range is going to be. But until you know more about the job description, you really don't know exactly what the expectations are, and that could change the outcome for what your salary would be. So for example, I come from the financial world, to be a controller at Joe's Body Shop or Collision would be very different than being the controller at United Health Group. Those are two very different jobs, different expectations, and the market is different for those particular roles, even though they both say controller. Even in today's world, a nurse. In United Health Group, we used to look at a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. Well, that's not true. There are specialties within nursing. There are some nurses that are much more difficult to find than other nurses. So you want to stay away from getting involved in the conversation, but you need to come up with a range to pass go. So here's a quick summary of some of the reasons you want to wait. Ideally, you want them to have seen you at your best. And this is very, very important. And I'm going to come back to this multiple times into why I believe that most people should be prepared to negotiate their compensation. Now, again, if you're not preparing along the way, this can seem to be a bit overwhelming. And maybe you say, well, boy, I've been unemployed for, in my case, 7 months. I don't want to risk this offer with negotiating. What if they say no? Well, until they've seen you at your best, there's some very easy ways to get involved in a conversation around compensation at the end, which could very naturally lead to what we would call a negotiation and what I would call just simply asking further questions to probe and see what else is out there. So, point 2, you got to know them. When you think about the interview process, on one level, it's kind of a silly process. Organizations post a position, those job descriptions that a job seeker pays so much attention to and is trying to match carefully words, and because they're afraid the applicant tracking system or ATS is going to kick them out, with good reason, okay? But the job descriptions are usually very, very flawed. I don't know of any organization that I've spoken to or have talked to the HR people where they go, boy, our job descriptions are very accurate. We update them all the time. Our managers pore over them. They take so much time to make sure they're prepared accurately. Hey, folks, if you're like my experience, they were cutting and pasting like crazy just to get something feasible for a job description so they could get it out in the marketplace to try and find someone that could fill it. So until you've gotten to know them and you've started to exercise your right, your need to figure out what's going on, you really haven't, you're not at the best spot to negotiate or talk about compensation. The next one goes without saying, fit the job requirements. You're in the final interview at that place for that job. And here's the point that a lot of people are not quite at, that third from the bottom. You've decided, I really want to work here. I spoke to someone yesterday, and they had just had a conversation about compensation with a possible employer. And yet there were things about that employer that this person just didn't feel really attracted to at all. And yet they were talking about compensation. And this person was wondering from me if I thought they should have gone deeper and tried to navigate and find out more about the compensation level. And my answer was no, not at all, because you aren't really interested. And to really go down that trail to find out more about compensation when in fact you don't really want to work there anyway isn't worth anybody's time, right? You might find out some nuggets of information, but the odds are that you won't, and it wastes the other person's time. So once you've decided I really want to work here, they've said we want you, then you want to use the process at the end of the the end of the interview process to say, I need to trigger them into thinking they've got to have me, right? So let me use the example of garage sales or estate sales. And my wife and I enjoy going to those. It's kind of a hunt for other people's trash and something that could become one of our treasures. Well, we walked into an estate sale where they had these paintings by a painter that we really liked, and I'm drawing a blank on his name. That shows how much I'm into art. And the house was full of these paintings. And in an estate sale, if you see something that you like, you better pick it up because the next person that comes through, may pick it up. And yet I had not arrived at the point of, oh, I've got to have that painting. Instead, I saw a variety of paintings that I might like. And of course, being the cheapskate that I am, if I come back the next day, they'll be further marked down because estate sales are there to clear out the house. I come back the next day, and of course, where this is going. The paintings that I would have most liked to have had were gone, right? I had not reached that point of I've got to have them, so I was willing to pay what they were asking at that previous day. Well, that's where you're trying, maybe a poor analogy, but you're trying to get the employer to say, man, what you do best is what we need most, and we have got to have you. Well, then you're in the prime area to have a great conversation about compensation. So that's the purpose of the process. You're trying to uncover the most that they may pay you. And we're going to talk about some areas that are not necessarily base compensation that you can find out about along the way. Having that filter, you're going to see, for example, what are the percentages of remote work that are expected? Well, what does the employer pay for you to have a remote office? Do you simply get a phone, a line? Do they reimburse you for whatever it is that you may have had to spend? Do they set up an actual workstation for you, or do they, just rely on you to work at your kitchen table? Those are all things that an employer could fund or not fund. And the more that you can find out these things about the employer, it allows you to have that much at the end. So there's a range. You can see these things. Again, if you use the estate sale example, you can understand that perhaps the level of desperation is not there. And also the leverage in the relationship goes deeper and deeper. Use another illustration of buying a vehicle. Several years ago, I went in looking for a used vehicle. It was near the end of the calendar year. They showed me a new vehicle with no miles that was actually cheaper than the used vehicle that I had come to look at. And of course, they had financing and all these things that made it such a sweet deal. So I spent some time talking to them. I went through, winnowed it down. And because I had done a lot of research on the used vehicle, I knew what the price could or should be, and that the new price was a very good price. Well, then we got into the financing side, and I had to fill out paperwork, and you wait for the manager to, it was just a time-consuming process. They came to the end, and I was looking at the final information from the financial manager who had run the numbers and the financing, and I said, well, unfortunately, this isn't quite correct. This is what the salesperson told me. It's not reflected here. And the difference was around $1,500. And they said, well, I'm sorry, sir, this is what the salesperson told us. And I said, well, then we don't have a deal. And I had waited at that point 6 or 7 hours at the dealership. I mean, it had literally taken most of my day. I was fairly exasperated. And on one level, I didn't want to walk away from the deal because I felt my time was valuable to some degree. At the other end, the principle of what this error was just very clear. So they called the salesperson in. The salesperson, oh, I'm sorry, it, of course, didn't quite get in the number. They started to work it. And then another issue came up. Well, by this time, I had sucked up enough of their time that they wanted to close that deal. And so even after round 2, it wasn't to the point where they had said it was supposed to be, I literally stood up and I started to walk out the door. I mean, just like the movies, I was literally so frustrated. And they go, no, come back. We'll change it. We'll change it. And so we got a deal. Now, I'm not suggesting that you want to go to that point with a future employer, but it's those are principles that you should have in your mind when you're trying to figure out, well, what is the most that an employer will pay for you? And not that you have it as perhaps as clear as a line item with shipping costs and all these other things that a car dealer may have, but you may feel like you're dealing with a used car dealer sometimes when you're talking to an employer. All right, homework. Well, let's think about, what do you need? And let me just go back up for 1 second. I'm not sure. Okay. You're going to be trying to find a range. And a lot of folks, when you have to give that answer about, well, what is the range you're looking for, there's a way that you can start to box that range in. And the first one of the things is knowing exactly what do you spend your money on? What is the absolute lowest number that you could accept? Well, to do that, you've got to know what you spend money on. What is your your level of living? And so to know your numbers on these things are very important. And I've talked to a number of people saying, oh, I can get by on much less. Okay, really? Tell me what's going to go away. And if you start looking at these expenses, yes, entertainment, okay, there's a variable cost that you may be able to cut. Unfortunately, you may cut charity as well. Maybe you can cut some on your food. Maybe you can. So yeah, you can slice a little bit of this, but ultimately, these are pretty much the bigger rocks of most people's budgets that just don't go away. You have a standard of living that you've been in for a while, and odds are that you're probably not really willing to go down a whole lot. So to know what that number is very important. You also need to know what are typical salaries for your field, and how do I find that out? This is an area that I think a lot of people discount, not because they don't think it's worthwhile or important, but they're not sure how to go about this process, and they're not willing to spend the time it takes to truly start to find out. And so if you look at option one, talking to people, well, and there's a variety of ways you can do that. And the last one is in caps, because that's what I've found to be part of the best is networking. And what I'm not suggesting here is that you go in and say, you know, I'm a controller, I'm networking with another controller, and in the first 5 minutes of the networking conversation, you're saying, well, how much money do you make? That is not a good strategy to have a good networking call. But in the conversation, I'm one controller talking to another controller. After you've developed the relationship, you've been through what I call the gospel of networking, the 20-minute networking meeting, all right? And you've started to work through that. Well, one of the questions you may consider asking the person is, I'd be curious, for a controller role with the experience that you think that I now possess, what should be my expectations for compensation in this general area? You're going to start to get information. You know, what I have found is most people that you network with want to be helpful. They want to be useful. And if you ask them an opinion-based question that is searching for information that is driven by their professional opinion, they're going to give it to you. Well, you ask 5 people, well, what do you think I should be looking for in the market that are in your field or in your function? You're going to come up with a pretty realistic number. All right. So talk to people is one way. Of course, the internet, as I mentioned earlier, can be a huge blessing and also a huge waste of time. But here are some job sites that you might find to have some useful information of. And I keep using a caveat there of might, because even these are not necessarily correct. If you go to Glassdoor, which is another one I didn't list here, you know, sometimes people share information on Glassdoor. It just may not be accurate. You know, people post all sorts of things on the internet, and even these that you see here may not be the absolute number. But like networking or talking to people, you can gather some useful information that can help you start to pull things together to arrive at a conclusion. All right. So internet can be very, very useful. So here is the crux of my whole presentation. 5 numbers you need to know. And I'd encourage you in your pen and paper to jot these things down, because we're going to go through them. And what I have found is it's a great way to develop what that range should be. And I'm going to pull out a little piece of paper here so I can remember the numbers that I'm saying to you, because I think this is very, very useful to do. So you're coming up to a new employer or a new potential employer. That recruiter says, well, what's the range? And I'm just going to use that number that I had said before. I'm going to arrive probably between $80,000 and $100,000. But how do I arrive at that range that has roughly a 20% gap to it? Well, first of all, the W-2 doesn't lie. So one thing I would recommend that you know is, what did you make before? And I'm going to look at total compensation here. All right. So let's say that your W-2 before was $90,000. All right. Now, my bottom line, I have to hit this number. Remember that where I had the different things that you needed to know about your insurance and your housing and your food. Well, what's that bottom line number? And maybe you say, well, that bottom line number is $75,000. What I have got to live to support my standard of living is 75. Now, number 3 is, what's that over the top number that you just go, man, if I got that number, I would have quit my old job a long time ago to go to this number. And this is way out there. And again, remember what I had made was 90,000. So let's say the new number over the top is 110. I mean, I'm offered almost 20% more than what I had made before. And knowing what I think I know about the industry, that's the over the top number. Number 4, now you're getting into how you feel. Just where would you feel comfortable? You're not real happy with the number. You'd like more, but you could be satisfied with that number. Maybe that number, let's just say that number is 95. You know, it's more than what you made with number 1, the W-2. You're hopeful that this job search would yield more of an increase for yourself, but you know, I could be comfortable with that. You know, it's certainly nowhere near the dream number. But it's certainly well above the bottom line number, and it's above what you made before. And then number 5, based on the research you've done, talking to people, doing the internet, what is the reality that you think the marketplace is at? And you may say, well, you know, the reality is that where I was, 90, I'm back to 90,000 again, that's probably a very realistic number. So now I might actually be happy about number 4 being 95. All right. So if I have completely lost you, as I've been referring to numbers on the screen and my numbers that I've jotted down, let me quickly repeat those for you so I haven't lost you. In number 1, the W-2 was $90,000. Number 2, I arrived at 75,000. Number 3 was 110. Number 4 was 95. And number 5 was 90. So when you look at those 5 numbers that are written down and you say, well, what would be a reasonable range that if I were offered any number in that range, I could see myself potentially accepting that offer? And I'm going to end up a little bit higher. I'm going to go with 80 to 100,000. I'm not going to go for potentially the over the top, because that market reality number is staring me in the face. And I think that's 90, but boy, I'd sure love to be wrong on the upside. I'd sure love to get an offer of 98. But if somebody offered me 88, I could see that's the mind game that you're playing with yourself. But you create the range, in this case, 80 to 100, by filling in these 5 numbers you need to know. There's lots of other ways to do this, folks. But what I have found in the years that I've been doing this and helping people arrive is these 5 categories can get you somewhere where if an offer comes in the range, you're going to feel okay accepting it. I remember I had a gentleman in my small group one time that he received the bottom number of the range as an offer. And he was asking me, well, Dave, what do I do? And I said, well, first of all, you can always negotiate, but you know, Joe, this was the bottom number of the range. So they're in essence honoring your expectation. And if, again, you don't have to accept it, you may not like the organization, you may not like that offer, but they're certainly in the range. So you want to ensure that the range you give fits with something that they eventually may offer. All right, so that is the range. Now, how do you bring a salary negotiation to a close? You don't leave it hanging. You always follow up. The process that's probably happened so far, remember I've told you I have an opinion that it's a flawed process. They posted a job description. You've networked, you've made the application, you've gone through a screening interview, you've had a conversation with the hiring manager, you've maybe met members of the team, You've met that person's boss. You've been through now the interview process. But think about it a second. That interview process has only taken perhaps 4 or 5 hours of your time. And now you're being asked with an offer to go to that organization and spend the majority of your waking hours at that place. Is that worth it to you? Right? And from the company's perspective, they've gone through the process that they feel comfortable with, and they've now made an offer. And let's, again, using our example of a range of 80 to 100,000, you know what? You were correct on that market. They made you an offer of 90,000, which was exactly what you made before, right in the center of the range. And you're at the point of, man, I don't know. Should I take it? Should I not? Well, when they make you that offer, many times it's done over the phone. Many times there's a follow-up of a salary letter to come. But you would always want to be enthusiastic when you receive the offer. You want to be gracious. You want to be grateful. You want to lean into the leverage and relationship you have. You ask when they would like a response. You may ask a final questions over the phone, some clarifying questions, and you want to see how much time can they give you versus, they say we need to know right now, which most companies do not do. Most organizations certainly understand your need to think about it and talk about it with someone. And what I would highly recommend is that you take advantage of that time. And here's a few reasons why. There's all sorts of information when you think about what you may know or not know to bring a salary negotiation to a close. That's that word you can't see behind my face. You think about these areas that you probably have not asked questions about. Now, this is one more reinforcement for why you have a filter going on about compensation all the time, because some of these things you could have found out as you go through networking. For example, let me just pick on the 4th bullet point under fringe benefits, parking. Well, boy, do I have to pay for parking or not? And sometimes whether a company's in the suburbs or not doesn't really change whether you pay for parking versus downtown Twin Cities or St. Paul. So to know that obviously has an impact on your compensation. The title you have may or may not have something to do with it. The pay grade almost always has something to do with it. And what I mean by a pay grade is within most organizations that are of any size, they have categorized all employees into a pay grade. If we refer to the government, you may have heard it as a G7 or a G11 or a G13. Well, every one of those pay grades has a salary range around them. And you may hear it referred to as a position code. And that allows the compensation folks at that organization to start to understand and know, excuse me, how many employees are in that pay grade, and then they can do some forecasting and planning and budgeting within that. So to know what that pay grade is important, not only because that helps you understand the range, but there are certain benefits by pay grade that happen with regard to that. So at United Health Group, for example, the benefits or the opportunities for a pay grade 28 were nothing near a pay grade 30. And a pay grade 30, excuse me, was very different than a pay grade 32. So those are things that a lot of people don't really think about. And that may not be able to come up through networking. I would potentially hold out until you get into that negotiation compensation, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Future raises. This is one that people oftentimes forget about. Just to ask, well, what has the history been on raises for your organization? And if it's a lot like a lot of other organizations, you'd be told, oh, you're going to get a whopping 2% average. That's 10 years of your life. Well, you need to factor that, folks. So these are a few things. I'm going to get to the negotiation. And so these are areas to benefit. Boy, no two companies are alike here. It used to be in the old days, and I do mean old 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we had pretty much the same benefits. Well, now there's a lot of different things that you need to know about. And these are just a few of those. And then financial benefits in retirement. What type of planning in 401k is there? Is there matching contributions? How long do I have to wait before matching happens? At United Health, we had an employee stock purchase plan that was very good. That just cut, for example, 6 years ago. I'm just making this up. Those are types of things, again, that you might be able to glean through your networking and conversation prior to coming to the point of trying to close an offer. So there's compensation, base compensation, there's health, and there's financial. There's a lot to know, and you probably haven't gotten to know it in the 4 to 5 hours of the interviews. Because guess what? They've been asking you questions. You've been giving your star stories. The compensation is not something that is generally talked about until the very end. Now we're at the end. Now is the point to have the discussion beyond the range. So here's the quick scenario, and then I'll wrap up and we'll open it up for questions. You've offered the range of 80 to 100. You've been given an offer of $90,000. You've gleaned a little bit of information in these three areas: health, financial, and salary. But there's still a myriad of questions you have. You haven't even seen benefits. You can start to look at them and run some numbers, variety of other things. But I would take it even farther back. I would suggest that you probably don't know the company well enough to make a fully informed decision of, do you really want to work there? Almost every time that I go through and coach someone once they've received an offer, and this is where I would highly encourage you, as Harry mentioned at the start, please take advantage of Crossroads Career. We're here to help you. We don't have a dog in this hunt for an employer. You're the person we're trying to support. So when you receive an offer, we'd love to get a call from you to say, hey, can you help me think through this offer? Can you help me kind of verbally process what I might consider doing? And what I would suggest is that you should always consider going back for another conversation. What do I mean by that? That doesn't mean I'm getting in person for a face-to-face hardball negotiation. That's not where I'm going. I'm simply suggesting that they like you, they think you're a good person for the job, but they may not love you yet. You may not be that, you haven't quite gotten them over the edge that they're willing to pay what they could or should pay for you on that particular day. Well, the more time you spend with them, the more they invest with you, the more likely they're going to like you and want to put further things on the table for you. And generally, you want to go back and ask them more questions about the job, about your team, about the future, about some of these things, perhaps on financial, health, or salary that you just haven't gotten the answers to. And it's not a negotiation. You're just trying to find out information. So for example, future raises. Well, do raises take place on 12/31 or on the anniversary date of the employee? Or do you guys have a different fiscal year end? Now, again, you may have already found out this information, but if if you haven't gotten into a conversation about how raises happen related to the year end, you could be missing something. For example, at my former employers, depending on when you started, you were not eligible for a raise. So our year end at United Health Group was 12/31. If we hired you in September and your start date was September, we would consider you for a raise. If you were hired in October, nope, that's too close to year end. You're just going to, but wait a second. If you started October 2nd, you would now go 15 months before a raise could kick in. All right. So those are reasonable questions for you to want to know the answer to. All right. So you go back to them, you meet with the hiring manager, ideally. You may meet with an HR person. You're asking good questions. And here at Crossroads Career, we can help you form those good questions. And in fact, if you go to our national website, I've written a couple blogs on questions you may consider at that time to get involved in. Well, what we want to happen is you walk away with much more information about just whether you want to work there or not, whether the compensation that they've offered you is a reasonable one or a good one or not. And they have moved to the point where, man, that person asked great questions. They would be a great employee. We like them a lot more than we even did before when we gave them the offer. So now you're in a different place. They've invested more time. They like you more. You've got more information. You still have not countered the offer on the 90,000, but now you have a lot better information to start to negotiate with if you choose to do it. You still may choose to say, okay, I'm just going to accept the 90,000. What I would encourage you to consider is to now go back and have a conversation about the offer, still being gracious and grateful, but asking questions about what the possibilities could be of moving that offer based on information you found out. So for example, using the one illustration, and there's a myriad of ones that could be used. Well, because I'm starting October 2nd, I'm going to go for 15 months or more without a raise. I'm wondering if we might be able to go to 91.5. Or what's the bonus around that? Or there's too many for our time here to keep going, but I would encourage you to get some help with people that do this all the time. And it's a confidential resource. You can have a free conversation with me, with Harry, with others of our Crossroads guides that are experienced with this. There's more information on our national website with blogs where I literally walk you through in a detailed level what I've tried to explain here this morning. But I see we have some things in the chat, so I'm going to turn it back over to Harry, and we can open up for questions if that's something that people would like to do.
Yeah, that's great. Scrolling back here to find where the first questions start. Okay, if I start 10% lower, that creates a cumulative loss over the years. It's harder to catch up over the years with the company. How do I address variance in things like 401k match and insurance premiums, net amount based on percent matches and decreased burden on employee? Well, essentially benefits is what they're referring to. If the benefits, for example, are a lot less, how do you factor that into the compensation?
Great question. And that's certainly something that you will need to factor into what your range is going to be. Because if you've run your numbers and you've left, in effect, money on the table at your old employer, or they've left you and taken that money, you want to try to make that up, but the market is what the market is. And so you may not be able to make it up. We had people at United Health Group that with stock equity awards, at times, if they were severed, they were not vested, and that money would come off the table. Well, as they negotiated, as these executives would negotiate in a future employer, they would try to perhaps get a starting bonus or maybe even some stock equity awards with the offer to try to make up for that. But there's a certain point where the market will take over and either allow wiggle room in that, or it simply won't. That is a great point to have done run your numbers on, however. So if you get into the negotiation, and in my example of the range of 80 to 100 and they make the offer of 90, you may say, well, boy, I'm wondering if there's any opportunity to go to 95, and here's the rationale I have for that. Whatever you do to negotiate, you should have some logic behind your numbers, because they're going to have logic behind theirs. And if you're able to say, well, I had to leave this or that or the other thing, okay, that's at least something you'd be able to roll through. It may not matter to them, but it's useful information to have.
Great point. And the logic has to be something relevant to the job or your previous compensation, not the fact that it doesn't make your BMW payment, right?
Yes, yes.
Somebody's asking, what's your opinion of the market as it is today, and the reality of where things are at currently?
You know, and Harry, I'd love to hear your opinion on this as well, but in my view, the market is as crazy as I've ever seen. And I remember the tech hullabaloo when I was in LA with Y2K. I mean, you've got some crazy offers being made in the area of AI and in technology. Some certain industries for executives are going nuts. The minimum wage changes that have been made in various states have driven up the cost of a lot of different things, which now employers are trying to react to and figure out with inflation what to do. So it's bouncing all over the place. All the more reason to me to really come into this thinking negotiation, because employers are, when you go through and you establish compensation, you're not just doing it by throwing numbers against the wall. You have a very regimented process. A lead lag is what we call it, analysis that's been done on your position codes that allows you to see what the compensation levels are in the marketplace. The problem is those are lagging. You know, with usually a 6 months to a year that it takes to gather the information from all these companies by independent brokers who then give you these compensation surveys back. So sometimes in the heat of battle, if depending on the type of role you have and the comp level you're at, you could easily command more. And that's why I think to test the market and find out and having those further meetings with the company is very, very worthwhile. But to me, I'm seeing it bouncing all over the place. Harry, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I agree. It is kind of crazy right now. And, you know, there are companies that pay under market. There are companies that pay over market. And, you know, the ones that you pay under market, you know, you try to convince them that they should be paying more. But the reality is they can usually find, you know, depending on how long they're willing to wait and where they're willing to compromise, they can usually find somebody at the compensation rate that they're offering. And so you know, we always want to turn every interview into an offer, but sometimes it makes sense to walk away from it if it doesn't meet your criteria. And so that's why Dave talked very well about knowing your numbers. And I find a lot of people don't know what do they need to make, you know, and obviously there's variables in terms of, you know, I'm generally looking for X, but boy, if it was 5 minutes from home and they gave me a lot of flexibility and, you know, from a lifestyle perspective, it's really an ideal situation and I enjoy what I'm doing, maybe I am willing to consider less to have those additional things. And so you always have to weigh each offer on a case-by-case basis. It's not just salary that matters. But, you know, in terms of the market in general, it's interesting is, you know, I've been recruiting for well over 30 years and been through a number of recessions. And in the scheme of things, historically, we're really still in a very strong job market. What happened, though, here in a year and a half ago, we had a blistering hot job market that I've never seen in my career at all. And then everybody's expectations got set to that. And so, you know, anything less than that feels like a worse market when, in fact, we're still in a strong market historically. Another question he says, and I think you addressed this earlier, but he says, I'm finding many companies asking about compensation during the first interview. Is that becoming the new norm? And how do we best handle that? And I think typically they are going to ask about compensation in the first interview.
Yep. Yeah, you've got to give the range to keep the interview going, but you don't want to get into the deeper discussion until the end.
Yeah. Gina, who's a recruiter also and happens to be on the call, but she says you can ask them what the range is in the first interview before you give your answer of what you're looking for. They may not always give you an answer, but it's worth a try, and sometimes they will, and then you can make a better educated decision on yes, that fits, or no, it doesn't.
Yeah. Great point.
What is the best ways to engage in severance or employment agreement discussions? And can you how can you best learn who has those kinds of agreements?
Yeah, networking is terrific for this because when you're having a good conversation, and again, the 20-minute networking meeting can't say enough good things about that book to help you structure what you're doing to best utilize the other person's time. But to ask if you were talking to someone at Joe's Body Shop, you could simply say, what kind of severance arrangements does Joe's Body Shop have? And that may not know. So networking is number one. Number two is when you get into that conversation, encourage you to go back to them of gathering information. That's why I asked that question. In today's world, down all around, let's say the worst thing happened and they have to lay off people. What kind of severance should I expect for, signing up and coming aboard as a new employee? And again, there should be a very forthright answer there, so you can factor into risk profile of that organization. But I would do it at the end of the conversation, as you're trying to build a rapport, even deeper relationship, and then lever that as best you can in negotiation.
Agreed. Somebody asking about working with headhunters or recruiters, and should a candidate be more open with the headhunter on salary expectations up front versus speaking directly to the employer? I think either or. I mean, it's the same answer. I mean, they're going to want to know where you're at to make sure they're not wasting time. You're going to want to know, if you fit in the range, and so that discussion is going to come up equally, regardless of who you're talking to, I think.
Yep.
Right. Great question. Will you provide the link that Dave mentioned? So it's crossroadscareer.org is the national Crossroads organization, and there's a ton of great resources and a terrific blog and a number of other things that you can find there. And then mncrossroads.com, and I'll mention this again here shortly as I run through everything about Crossroads, but mncrossroads.com is our local website for events that we have here. So crossroadscareer.org is the national website. Somebody said, I always ask right away, what's the salary budget for this role? And we talked about that. And I've wasted too much time to find out a role is 50,000 below market. It's an interesting thing on this question is that you want to know in advance, what their range is, and then are surprised when they want to know what your range is. And so it's both parties need to understand. What if you have a relatively large range between what I would be willing to accept based on expenses and what I would like to make based on my previous salary? Maybe it's more than 20%. I'm assuming their question is.
So if their expenses are, in this case, higher, in my example, than 75, let's say the expenses were 100 and they were already underwater at their previous W-2 of 90, that's a very challenging situation, because somewhere we have to live within our means. And unfortunately, the market isn't paying attention to our means. And so we may have lived, at certainly within our means, but then certain things happen in our lives, a divorce, a job loss. I mean, a death of a spouse, and all of a sudden our income is completely different than our lifestyle had been. And if the market place for your salary can't make up that lifestyle, then difficult decisions need to be made about that lifestyle. And those are just, again, very challenging times that I'd encourage you to get some assistance from someone at Crossroads to kind of work through and verbally process through the options and the choices, and figuring out how to manage within that.
I think the question actually is the other way, is perhaps your expenses are very low, but you made quite a bit more money in your previous job. So your range between what you need and what you'd like to make is more than 20%. You have to give them still a realistic range. And so I would say pick a 15 to 20% range that you're comfortable with, right? It doesn't have to match your other numbers.
Yeah. So Harry, you wouldn't tell them to go buy a Mercedes to increase their lifestyle cost?
Probably not the best strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, yeah, sorry, I misunderstood the question.
That's
Yeah,
right.
you're in a good spot, and you can simply have that be a non-factor in creating your range.
Absolutely. That's it for now. I didn't mention when I introduced you, Dave, but for everybody else's knowledge, Dave is joining us from San Diego this morning. And so while we got on at 7:30, he got on at 5:30. And so he had a lot more energy at 5:30 than I had. So I'm really grateful that he took the time and was willing to get up to do this with us this morning. And so hopefully that was helpful for you. I know I got some good nuggets out of there to talk about with people as well, as I'm having conversations with people through their job search and salary negotiations. And so grateful for all that. Let me switch right now, share a screen to be able to run through quickly the other things we offer through Crossroads as well, so that you can take advantage of other things. We have a number of different help and resources to help you be as successful as quickly as possible in your job search. Everything we offer through Crossroads is on our website locally here in the Twin Cities, mncrossroads.com. As I mentioned, crossroadscareer.org is the national site, and there are additional resources there and other information. So encourage you to check out both of them. But all of our schedules, upcoming events, resources we have available on our site. But there's also a job board. We have a number of local organizations and companies that know what we do, and they post positions on there, and they are in many cases posting their contact information in there too, so you're not just applying to a black hole. So I encourage you to check it out regularly. It is the most visited page on our website, and we have new postings that go up all the time, so check it out. It's not as populated as Indeed.com or LinkedIn, certainly, but there are a lot of great roles on there, so take advantage of that. Our cadence generally throughout the month, each month for Crossroads, is that we have an in-person meeting at Grace Church on the first Thursday morning of every month, and that includes, after the main presentation, we have our networking meeting, and I'll describe that in a moment here too. The second Thursday evening of each month, we have an in-person meeting at Woodbury Lutheran Church, and then the third Thursday morning is the webinar that you are participating in this morning. And so you can find all the details again on our website, and I encourage you to take advantage of all of them. These webinars are terrific. I'm glad we're able to do them, and obviously we learned how to do them during the pandemic, but it is so much better when we can actually be in person and see people face to face and have side conversations and make new relationships and have better productive conversations there. So if it's possible for you to attend one of our in-person meetings, I really encourage you to do that. On a weekly basis, there's a number of ways you can get plugged in. Networking with Grace is our weekly networking group where you can trade ideas and contacts and companies and leads with each other. And the first Thursday of every month, it's in person only at Grace Church, and it's immediately following our topical presentation like we had this morning. And then all the other Thursdays of the month, second, third, fourth Thursdays, are through a Zoom meeting online only. So you can take advantage of that as often as you like. For the Zoom meetings, you do need to pre-register in order to get the Zoom link. And so the details are on the website, and the registration form is on there. We have one-on-one coaching. If you want to talk with any of our volunteers about anything regarding your job search, whether it's your resume, whether it's about negotiating an offer, whether it's preparing for an interview or doing mock interview practice, or just to talk through where things are at and maybe get some fresh ideas on networking or anything else, you can sign up on the form online. One of our volunteers will reach out to you and arrange a time for the two of you to either have a Zoom meeting or a phone call, and you guys can talk about, like I say, anything you want regarding your job search. So take advantage of that. You can do that as often as you'd like, and it's all of this is free. I'm grateful we have people on our team that are prayer warriors, and they pray for the ministry as a whole, but they certainly answer individual prayers. And so we have a prayer request page on our website you can fill out, and somebody will pray for you. Or if you feel like you need some additional spiritual support and kind of talk through your situation with somebody more from a spiritual and moral support perspective rather than the tactical stuff, we have a team for soul care, and you can fill out the form on or send us information through the website as well, and we can hook you up to talk to somebody and set up more of a regular discussion there. The meat and potatoes of what we offer is through our online classes, and we have an 8-week class through Zoom meetings that covers every aspect of a successful job search, starting with attitude and getting in the right frame of mind, and presenting yourself as positively as possible. And we do assessments, talk a lot about networking. We dive into resumes and interviewing best practices. We talk about negotiating, as we did here. We talk about selecting the right job, and there's much, much more. And as much as the content is really strong and to give you more confidence, are you doing the right things for your job search to be as effective as you can and be helpful? I think equally important is the weekly check in with others that are in the same boat, and light accountability and encouragement and moral support. As you know, this is an emotional roller coaster, and the more you can build into your week to get you back to a positive perspective and be optimistic about it and get some encouragement, I think is so critically important. And then throughout the 8 weeks, we also talk about what's God's perspective of your career and your life. And those are some of the more important questions than just what other job you're going to get. Obviously, your career is critically important, but some of these other questions are even more so. We have new online classes beginning monthly. We have another one scheduled coming up in June. You can find the details on the website and register there. And I really encourage you to get plugged in on that, because that's where I think you can get the most in-depth help as you're walking through this process. If you haven't already, I encourage you to join our LinkedIn group. If you put in MN Crossroads Career Network in the search box, you'll find us. And we have over 2,500 people now that are in the group that have been through Crossroads. Obviously, the overwhelming majority of those have landed in new positions. And you can search through and find people at companies that you're interested in pursuing and reach out to them to get some advice and some insight into their organization, maybe get referrals, maybe get a referral for a particular job there. It's up to them how they're willing to help, but they stayed in the group in order to be accessible for others to be able to help as well. And once you land in a new job, I encourage you to stay in the group and be available to others. It's a great way to give back by being available after you land. But there's a ton of other information that gets posted in there, including jobs and job search ideas and the next events we have coming up. And so check it out, get involved in the group, and find people there that can be helpful for you. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel as well as all the previous webinars we've done over the last few years. And so there are a ton of great topics you can look up. One of the advantages with watching them on YouTube is you can watch them in double time. So you can, they go by faster. You can curl up and watch as many job search videos as you like. There's really literally, I think, a couple hundred on there, probably more than that now. different topics and speakers. So encourage you to take advantage of that. And like I say, this one will get posted before the end of the day today. I've got a busy day, so maybe by tomorrow, but it'll be on there soon. And you can review this if you missed anything. I just want to acknowledge we have a number of people that volunteer for Crossroads, and actually over 45 now, and I'm grateful for all of them. It allows us to do all the different things we offer. Nobody's getting a paycheck, so as you get a chance to connect with people through Crossroads, I encourage you to thank them for their time and effort, because it gives us the chance to be able to do all this, and everybody's just doing it because they have a heart to help others and to serve with the expertise that they have. And so I'm grateful for that. If you don't have a church home, I encourage you to take advantage of one of the churches, either Grace Church in Eden Prairie or Woodbury Lutheran Church. And you can find all the information on the websites given there for in-person services or streaming online. But there are so many other ways you can get help and support and relationship and community within the churches, as well as on top of great teaching and spiritual support. Our next webinar next month is actually pretty significant. We have, Dave mentioned multiple times in his presentation about the 20-minute networking meeting. If you haven't gotten the book, I really encourage you to do that. But Nathan Perez, one of the co-authors of the book, is going to be presenting on that topic next month on our webinar. So that's Thursday morning, June 20th. So if you haven't landed a job, or even if you have landed a job, this will be a topic that I think is going to be worthwhile for you to check out. So you need to register online, but come and join us for that. So I hope this morning we get back on here. I hope this morning has been worthwhile for you. You got some great information, and hope you can join us again for other events. And more than anything, hope that you land a job quickly and that you're off and running. You know, I joke with people all the time, nobody wants to become a professional job seeker. They just want to land in the next job and move on with their life, right? But there are things that are different today than there were many years ago. And so the more help you can get along the way can make it more effective. Thanks for being here, and have a great day.